So I just hit the record. Now we're ready to go. So I got to, there's so many little things that I can goof up here. And so what we've done is I brought in a headset and we got it plugged up here, and then I got somebody checking that I'm sending to their headset. And so that means I'm getting through, and we're checking my record. Okay, March 8th, 2019, regular scheduled meeting, 2309 at Collin College, coming at you from beautiful downtown Plano, Texas. And let's see, next week will be spring break. We will not meet next week. Now, what I'm probably going to do is, optionally, I'm probably going to go ahead and start, I will do this, I'm going to go ahead and log on at 10 o'clock from home or wherever I am, and see if anybody has any questions or anything like that, okay? So it won't be a formal lab. I'm not going to do a lecture or anything like that, but I'll be available at that time. Let's see, I put out a couple of announcements regarding test one. I've not graded test one yet. Should be caught up about to that point where I'm ready to start. Okay, and as usual, I'll always have people that will miss the test. I've never given a test that somebody hadn't missed. So I turned it back on today. If you have already submitted your test, do not resubmit. Okay. But so that's for people to turn in. And let's see what else. Next week, spring break, and I guess we're ready to go.
It is really hot in here.
It is really stuffy and hot in here today. Maybe what we could do that might help is to turn off some of the monitors that aren't in use and some of the computers that aren't in use. Those
what
that they
makes it warm is the fact that the computers are using hard drives in them.
Well,
and when computers use hard drives in them, it takes longer for them to access data from the hard drive, and that really makes them idle a lot.
Right. The equipment is making the room hot.
Yeah.
And it does. The other thing we might be able to do is push this door open a little bit more. I got that door open a little more, and we'll try this one, and maybe it's just yeah. I wish we had a little more control over it.
Yeah.
In a large building, we don't. Okay. I wanted to review what we did last week. I know that we have slept since then. You had the test and you've been worried about that. So let's go back over what we did. And was that module 7 is data aggregation. And data aggregation first starts off, I'm going to mainly use these guys. I did send you a file on it. Okay, we started off talking about these set operations, and we talked about union of two tables and intersection of two tables. You've seen this, you've heard of it a lot from your math classes. I expect they talked about it. If I do a union and I say select everything from invoices, union, select everything from invoice archive. The two select statements need to be compatible. Compatible means that they return the same number of values, and the things that they're returning are of similar type. So where I'm expecting numbers, I have to have numbers. So invoices and invoice archive are similar tables. And so now a union, and I usually format it like this. I indent the select statements, and then I put the union. So I don't use select asterisk very much. Why not?
It's going everything from.
Just takes everything, and most of the time I'm going to process that further. So most of the time when I'm programming, and even if I want everything, what I'm going to do is list all of those tables that I want. And I've got them somewhere, and I just copy and paste them in there if I'm doing a lot of programming. So I very seldom will use that select star. That's kind of a quick and dirty way to just get everything. If I want to test it out, this should work. I believe it will. I will have to say at the top, I will have to say use APDB. Kind of a crummy format there, but this should give it to me now. Notice that I got a bunch of stuff, and order by invoice ID descending. The only reason I said that is because there's trying to highlight those. I've got 2 of them in there that come from the invoice archive, and that's 300 and 400. The rest of them all came from invoices. So I put the 2 tables together. If the fields do not have to be named the same in both tables, if they are not named the same, I will pick up the field names from the first table. Okay. The fields do not have to be exactly the same type. They have to be compatible. That means currency is a number. Therefore, I can have currency in one field and something that's a number in another field. As long as it's a number, it can deal with it. Okay. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this. This is actually in the previous chapter. It just doesn't seem to fit any place. And I say in here how using a union, I can implement a full outer join even if I don't have one. In other words, I want everything from both tables. So I do a left outer join, union it with a right outer join, or vice versa. Flip them around. In this case, I flipped A and B around. I could have done left outer join, right outer join, and accomplished the same thing. Intersect works the same way. So this is essentially set union, set intersection, and set difference. Let me go on to the next. This is where the fun begins. Aggregate functions. Aggregate functions that we use are count, sum, min, max, and average, AVG. These ones, every textbook uses these, but there's about 20 or so aggregate functions. You have lots of built-in functions. For example, you have standard deviation and variance in there, statistical functions. The reason that we don't use those so much is because they return real floating point numbers, and lots of times students will get in this class and they don't know what a standard deviation is. So there's no real point in sitting here talking about it. Most people know what an average is. thing about the, let's see, if I say to count in a range, it's going to count all non-null values in the range. If I just want to count every record, so it would be an example. Count of the invoice ID as my count. There are 114 rows in this table. And I know that I'm counting the invoice ID. The invoice ID is the primary key of invoices. And I pointed out before that there is no sense in counting a primary key because it must be the same as the number of rows in the table. Must be the same. Therefore, I can speed this query up just a little bit if I say, because that cannot be null. If I just say count everything, here is where I would use the everything operator. And that says if you see a record there, count it. Okay. Doesn't matter what it is. Otherwise, I'm only going to get those values that are not null. Do I have any, let's see, what's null in there? Let's take a look at it. Now, lots of times I will go over here, and if I want to see the table, I'll go to the table, and I want to see the invoices table. I can right-click it and say edit the top 200 rows. I always say edit instead of select. And then that way I can see everything that's in it. Well, the top 200 of them. And that lets me see if I have any null values. Surely I have. There's a null value in the terms ID. I know I put it in there. I was just trying to remember where it was. Null value in the payment date. Should it be? Yeah, a few nulls in there. So payment date is a good example. So if I count payment date, I will count only the non-null values. 102 there, I suppose. So how many do I have? Well, I can select them. Okay, so I got count. Now, where I'm going to have a little issue is what happens if I say select the max or the min, the max of the payment date. Didn't mean new query, I meant. Say again. I should have gotten a warning here. Min and max. I guess maybe I've got them turned off. Many systems will give you a warning when you are selecting the minimum and the maximum and you have null values in the range. Because what does that do? Is the null value greater than or less than anything in there? So I don't really know where those fit. So lots of times it'll give you a warning. I don't see it get, I was expecting one here, but I didn't, I'm not getting it, okay? I was going to mention another thing. On average, I want to find, if I want to find where the average is equal to something, very seldom will an average ever be equal to whatever number you think it is. You know, what is the average number of children somebody has in the class or in the world, in the country? And very seldom will you ever get anyone who has that many children. I mean, you'd have to get something like, 3.2791 or so. I'm just making that up. So therefore, what you would say is I want to, how close do you have to be to this average? So I will usually use that between operator. So I would say where the average is between 3.7 and 3.8. I'm going to call that close enough to average. And that's, you'll have to do that in computing lots of times, because particularly when you get into the calculated values like that, they won't always calculate outright. So you'll have to say, what's close enough? Right? Is my calculation for average close enough? I just want to get pretty close to it. Okay, group by. Remember the new rule. Here's the new rule. If your select line, we covered this last time, if your select line contains an aggregate function and anything that is not aggregated, so one or more aggregate functions and one or more not aggregate functions, then any selected field that is not in an aggregate function must appear in the group by clause. There will never be any exceptions to this, whether you are in Access or Oracle, or SQL Server, MySQL, they're all the same. Okay, questions? Now, in Access, well, Access does SQL also, but in Access you do it in a little graphical user interface, and as soon as you put in a aggregate function, they all come out as group by. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put an aggregate function in to select everything, particularly if you're selecting a primary key. So I select vendor name, and then the count, excuse me, vendor ID, primary key. I'm selecting the primary key and a count. It makes absolutely no sense at all to do that. Why not? Let me try it. This makes no sense. Select vendor ID. And we can just count everything. I usually would have put that in caps, but say, Dr. Smith, you're not making any sense here, dude. Why not? Well, oh, I didn't name that field. Yes, I should have. Also need a group by clause. Okay, I agree with you. I will always name a field. You should always name a field. If you don't really care about the name, neither do I. Okay. However, a field should be named. Shouldn't just have no name. Give it a name. If it's X, unless I tell you to give it a specific name, X will work fine. Now this is going to have one other little problem, as Stephen pointed out. What's my little problem here? Big problem here. Execute, and I get a big red letter there, and it says must be because it's got to be in the group by. So what has to be in the group by? Vendor ID. And I am not making any sense at all with this query. Why not?
I think vendor ID is under 2 tables.
No. I mean, yes, actually, it's a foreign key into other tables. But what am I going to get? When I group by the vendor ID and I execute this, I got everything in there is a 1. Why? Well, it's primary key. So when I group by that primary key, it makes absolutely no sense. All I'm going to see in there is 1s. They're all going to be groups of 1s. That means that every place that the vendor ID is different is going to be its own group, and then it's going to count how many are in that group. Well, how many are going to be in that group? 1. So it makes no sense at all to group by a primary key. Okay. And I could add fields to it, but if I have the primary key in there and I'm trying to put a count in there, I'm not going to see it. Now, lots of times, and I'm not sure how much of this I want to get into today because I'm kind of stepping outside of SQL now. What if you wanted to see on each row, you wanted to see the count. I want to print some things, and I want to print a count of the records, and I don't care that it's repeating each time. For example, I have 109 records, let's say, and I just want to see that 109 on every row. That might be something you want to see. Why do I want to see it? I don't know, because I want to see it. I want to see it as part of the output. And in SQL, I'm always going to get everything in a table. Everything in SQL is going to give me back a table unless it gives me back one number. And in that case, even if it gives me back one number, it's a table with one row and one column. Okay, there's several languages like that. And the way, I don't think I'm going to go there. The way, what you can do, you do have it in SQL. We're not going to do it as part of this class. We might get into it if you want to go here and we have time. We might go into variables. You can declare a variable, and you can put something in a variable. And whatever you put in that variable will stay in that variable until you hit a go. Then it goes away. So that's one of the things Go's do. They open what we call a scope, and a variable that you declare exists inside of that scope. I'm getting outside of SQL now. So maybe I better come back to SQL. But you can declare variables in every, well, the where changes. And so if I said where you do in SQL Server, it would be different from where you do in Oracle. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it right now. But if you guys decide you want to see some programming, we can do some. Towards the end of the class, I like to build in a couple of weeks, just for a week or two, a week maybe, just to smell the roses a little bit. And okay, big one here. This is the one that confuses students. Why am I getting an error message? Do you have an aggregate function? Yes, I have an aggregate function. Do you have something that's not an aggregate function? Well, yes. Are all of those non-aggregates in a group by? Oh, and you can't group by an aggregate function. I can't group by the count. Okay. New rule. What's that comedian that does that? New rule segment. What's his name? Maher, Bill Maher. One time he was going to be our keynote speaker. Oh, for a graduation at Texas A&M, at one of the branches of Texas A&M, and I guess whoever signed him up to be our keynote, our commencement speaker, had never listened to him. The guy is vulgar. You kind of like listening to, I don't know. He uses a lot of cuss words. Let's put it that way. Enough of that. Let's go on. Okay, having. This is now we have all of our SQL. So we have the full syntax of the select statement. Select whatever we're selecting from. Okay, here it is. Select stuff from table or tables. Here we can have our join, so we can have an inner join or an outer join in there. Where clause. Where allows ands and ors. The where applies to each individual row. Where applies to the rows. That's the important piece of this. Group by something. Having. I always put group by and having on the same line because I think of them together. You can't have a having without a group by. Having applies to the group. So if there's something special about the groups that you want to see. So I want to select, I'm selecting, what am I selecting here? I'm selecting the vendor ID, and I'm selecting the average and the count from invoices. And I want to say where the invoice total is greater than 10. Okay. So that applies to each individual record. Invoice total is greater than 10 is not a group property. That's in the record. So that's always what you're asking is it in the record? Invoice total's in the record. Having count greater than 1. Now that's a property of the group. So I only want to see groups where the count is greater than 1. So where applies to the record, having applies to the group. I still cannot use the alias. The alias that I created up there on the select line is pretty useless when I get down here to this. Now, if I could create a variable, but since I'm not going there, there's no point in me talking about it. There's ways to get around it, but that's really more trouble than it's worth. And then finally, the order by, notice in the order by, I can use the alias. So we are executing, the from line executes first. If I alias the table and give the table another name, for example, if I say from invoices as I, that I, where I've changed the name of that table, is usable throughout the entire select query. That's the first thing that happens. Where happens next? Where happens next? Think of the group by as happening, well, the group by happens here, but we don't invoice anything, well, excuse me, invoice. We don't alias anything on the group by line. So the group by happens with these guys. Finally, the select happens. Now these aliases up here exist. So when I finally get down to the very last thing that happens, the order by, but that's the thing about SQL, it does not happen in order. Some people are always wanting to say, well, we need to rewrite that syntax and make it happen in order like languages you're expecting, like C and Java. That's okay, SQL isn't C and Java. Okay. Here in all its glory is the full select statement. And as you can see, it gets a little wild. Discussion.
Can you run it just so we can see what it looks like?
John. Let's first of all, okay, let's go through it. And I got a hot mouse today, along with everything else that's hot in this class today. Okay, here's our, what is this saying? I want to see the vendor name. I want to see the average. I want to see the count of rows that are in each one. From invoices, inner join vendors, I have to have the inner join because I am taking the vendor name. The vendor name is not in invoices. The main thing I want here is invoices, but since I'm wanting to get the vendor name, I have to have the join. Where the invoice total is greater than 10, grouping by any counts greater than 1. So since it'd be the average invoice total, I'm only going to see vendors that have more than one invoice. and then ordering by the average. So what I see 10 rows here that have more than one. So I won't see anybody with just one invoice. I've got a lot of people with just one invoice. Only see 10. I've got a lot of vendors that don't have any invoices. So if you were to check the vendors with 0 invoices, no, that's a good one for. I think I gave you that one on a childless parent query. So find all the parents, and that's a good exercise. I believe I also asked you to find all the invoices that were orphans. Do I have any invoices that don't have a vendor associated with them? I believe there's one in there. How can I tell that one very easily? How can you find orphans? Don't have to do a table join to find an orphan. No.
Null primary key.
No, foreign key. The foreign key, the parent, the key it takes me to the parent is null. That's an orphan. Finding an invalid one is harder. Now I have to have an outer join. Okay. Questions? Now you can do most of SQL. This is a good place to take spring break because we have come to a break point, I guess, in SQL. Right now, the select from where query is probably the most heavily used one. It's the guy that gets our information. Now we have insert and update and delete. You almost never delete from a database. Oh, well, you can. A lot of times you'll have tables whose job is just to hold some data just for a second or two while you process it, and then you delete it. Yeah, okay, I agree with that. But from your working tables, I would never delete an invoice. I'm never going to delete a patient's record. Once you're in the database at Collin College, you're here forever. They'll never throw your transcripts away. You'll be able to get them in hopefully 100 years. Well, I don't know. But in theory, if you work for a doctor's office, you can't delete a patient's record just because they're not your patient anymore. Just because if your patient dies, you can't delete their records. Go ahead. What? Well, yeah, I agree with you. I'm being told that they clean it up, yes. And as the patients haven't been active for a while, what will happen is they will end up going out to another database someplace. Yes, what they usually do with it in the record, for example, I could look at the vendors. Here's the vendors. Let's take a look at vendors. What I would do with vendors, I would have another field in here. And that field would be called V_active. And its values would be 0 and 1. And it would be interpreted as 1 would mean that the vendor was active. 0 would mean that the vendor was inactive. So if I wanted to make a vendor inactive, I simply set that field to 0. And as far as my software goes, they disappear. Now they're still there. I can get them back easily. They're still there, and that's the way I do it typically. It is true that a table can get so big that it just gets unwieldy, and then I want to migrate those guys that I haven't heard from in 10 or 15 years. I'll migrate them out to the disk someplace. And yes, that's true. I will clean it up sooner or later. I'll have to. But what I like doing is having a way that I can only see those active students. So if you're a student of mine and I haven't seen you in a year, well, shoot, you're probably going to come back. I hope. So I don't want to delete your record. I don't want to archive your record. I want to keep you still in my table, but I just don't want to see you every time I turn around. So what I would do, I would set up another field in here, and that field would be active, and it would have values of 0 and 1, where 0 was not active and 1 was active. The default, when I put a new student in, they come in with a 1. To make them inactive, I change that to 0, and we'll learn how to not see that later. Okay. Chapter 6, I believe this is.
Hey, Dr. Smith, a quick
Monday.
question.
Go ahead.
So with the aggregation functions, are we going to cover any of the over partition bys, or is that more for the advanced or the next class?
What is the question again? I didn't catch it exactly. I can turn that volume up. Go ahead again. I take this headset off.
Sorry, the aggregation functions.
Yeah.
Are we going to cover any of the over partition by, or is that more for the next class or advanced?
That is a next. That's a next class.
Okay, thank you.
So a partition is just that goes to the table and the way that the table is set up in the database. We will cover it, or we can cover it. That's one of the things that we can do. It's not in the book per se, but that's something that is definitely a topic. And if that is a topic of interest, there just isn't time in a semester to cover everything. So we have to kind of pick and choose. For example, would we cover database optimization and setting up databases and indexes? So we can come back to that later. So save that question and let's see if we have time for it. Chapter 6. There are the slides. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. For your reading pleasure, I've put them out there for you. I don't do a lot of PowerPoints. I might use these as they're fairly good. Here I point out that we can skip much of the syntax. I've talked about this later. I will continue to use the full syntax. We will continue to use the full syntax in this class. I'm just pointing it out. When you see it clipped by textbooks, SQL programmers are if they wanted to have a clipped syntax, they should have been C programmers, is what I say. But I teach it with the full syntax, but many times the textbooks will tend to shorten it. They will drop the word as. They will drop the word inner and outer. Okay, don't you do that. Don't turn in. I'll take a point off if you drop those words, but you should be able to read a query and figure out where the word inner should be. So if it just says join, it's an inner join. If it says right join or left join, it's an outer join. And I noticed that our authors are doing that quite a bit in this one, so I thought that was a good place to mention it again. For example, select vendor name, no comma. Notice that there's no comma between them. So this renames it. That's aliasing that table. Vendors V. It's renaming it's renaming the table. I'm aliasing the field, renaming the table. Notice I'm just saying join here instead of inner join. Okay. And you'll see it that way. You'll see people will write that way. And they'll say to me, Dr. Smith, just get over it. I'm not in your class, so I'm going to write it the way I want to. Okay. I'm over it. Okay, queries, subqueries. Here's a video by Jamie King, and Dr. King, does clip his syntax. Okay. And so I guess I give him an F. But it's another way to hear the same thing that I'm going to talk about. So we'll talk about subqueries. A subquery is two queries essentially put together, and let's see. Consider a common SQL query in our language. I want all of the vendors' names that have no associated invoices, okay? Now that's an outer join coming up. I want all of the vendors' names that have no associated invoices. If you think about it, the first question is, what am I asking for there? That's basically a childless parent query. Okay. Okay, and I say that on the next line, or an outer join. Pretty simple. What tables do I need? Well, I'm asking for where's the information? Well, vendors' names is in the invoices table. Obviously, I need the vendors table, and since I'm matching it to the invoices table, or not matching it, I'm not going to take anything from the invoices, but it has to be in the query because I'm going to be referencing it. And so we're ready to write it. Let's write this query, and here is the query. I want to take everything from the vendors table, left outer join. Okay, so my outer join is pointed at the table from which I want everything. Okay, left outer vendors, left outer join invoices. I tend, it is my way of writing queries and keeping them straight. I put the parent table on the left. Did I have to? No. Do you have to? No. Am I trying to get you to? No. Trying to get you to come up with your own way of doing it. And that's why if, I see syntax all the time, particularly formatting all the time, and I say, ugh, why are you doing that? But you're doing something with it. And I guess you like it that way because I see method to your madness. And so I don't have much to say about it. So you could have said invoices, right outer join vendors. You gotten the same thing. Where on VID, IID, where the child key is null. Beautiful example of a childless parent. Okay. Here's what to notice. Now, I personally like subqueries. Subqueries are just another way of thinking about the same thing that we've been doing, but there's some things that I can do with subqueries very easily that just don't lend themselves to joins as well. Oh, and vice versa. So there's no way of saying one is always better than the other. Sometimes one is better, sometimes the other's better. Usually, 90% of the time, I can do it either way. If I ask you, if I say, show me a subquery to do this, then I want to see the subquery. Okay, notice that in this particular query, everything that is returned comes from one table. Anytime that happens, I'm going to feel all warm and fuzzy about a subquery because it's meat for a subquery. This one, I see it a lot better as a subquery than I do as an outer join. I don't know whether you'll see it or not, but to me, outer join, I always had trouble with outer join. Back in the old days, outer join, well, we did it with the implicit syntax. So we said, from vendors, comma, invoices, and that was an inner join. Well, an outer join, you'd say vendors, comma, excuse me, it'd be vendors plus, comma, invoices. And it was different which side the plus went on, so it was really kind of a mess. Everybody had their own syntax for an outer join, and that was what drove going to the new syntax. There's nothing wrong with the old syntax, it's just that there wasn't any common, or there was a whole lot of ambiguity in it. A whole lot of people were doing it differently. So we said, okay, I say we, I mean, okay, we're gonna all do it this way. So instead of any one person, so everybody's platform, they wanted to keep theirs the way it was. I said, nope, everybody's going to a different syntax. And so they came up with the outer join. Inner join is pretty consistent. Okay, here, but look at this one. This is an outer join. Select what? Oh, vendor name from vendors. Okay, where the vendor ID is not in this set. Now, this set meaning, I guess I should be pointing with my mouse instead of pointing to the screen for not in this set. Point with my mouse instead of the my hand, because they have a hard time seeing me point with my hand if they're watching online. So I want all of the vendor names that aren't where their ID is not found here. Now, to me, that makes more sense. Which one's better? Well, the one that makes sense. I mean, to you. Because to some people are going to say, well, no, the outer join is much better. In that case, I agree with you, because I always agree. Okay, observations. Let me point out a few things where students sometimes have trouble. Subqueries are a very powerful way of doing things, and they should both be in your toolbox. Subqueries and joins. There are some things that are just much easier to do as a table join. And then there are some things that are much easier to do as a subquery. The syntax requires these parentheses. Some people believe that the subquery is more intuitive. In general, in terms of efficiency, you do it like you want. There's not one way that's better than the other. I see we're coming up on our break time. In general, a subquery is no more or less effective than a join. Oh yes, Professor King did raise a good point. Do not use select distinct vendor ID. Now, in this case, I'm select a vendor ID. Yes, vendor ID is not unique in invoices. I can have duplicate vendor IDs in the invoices. So if I wanted to see the vendor IDs that I had, I would probably say select distinct, or maybe select count distinct. So distinct is a little bit like a group by. In other words, just show me the ones that are, don't show me duplicates. And Professor King says don't do distinct in a subquery. Even though you may be tempted to say select distinct vendor ID, you may think that that is going to help your query. It won't. In fact, it'll slow it down a little bit. Okay, so don't use the distinct keyword in the subquery. Distinct vendor ID. It's either in the set or it's not. And it's going to quit looking when it finds one of them. Well, I say it's just about break time. Yeah, it's about 10 minutes till. We're going to restart in 10 minutes. Hey, Stephen, your job is making sure I turn this recorder back on. Pausing the recording now. Resume recording. I want to, let's see, I want to return to the meeting. Why can't I do that? I should be able to push this down.
Oh, just hit Google Chrome.
Yeah. Oh, here. Yeah. Okay, so I was expecting to see. There we go. Testing. Okay. We were talking about these subqueries, and in general, it's whichever one you like the best. But given that, there are some, let me see if that's on this next one. Ah, yes, it's this next one. There are some families of queries where a subquery is clearly the way I go. And the thing that I look for when I'm doing a subquery, or when I is everything that I am returning, all of my select, is it coming from one table? If I'm in that world, I'm probably going to go with a subquery. Another one that, what?
They can't see your screen right now.
They can't see my screen?
Yeah.
Have I lost it?
Yeah. But they only see this right here.
Okay, how about now? Can
Now
you
they
see?
see it.
Now you can see the screen.
That works. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. I guess that's good for having, it's working like it's supposed to work. We've got a monitor here now, and one of the students in the class is monitoring that he can see and hear it at all times. So I got someone right here to keep an eye on it for me. So when it gets turned off like that, it doesn't stay off for 30 minutes. Where was I? Going back here. Okay. Does everything come from one table? If everything, now, it doesn't have to come from one table for me to use a subquery, right? It's just whenever everything comes from one query, I'm going to go subquery on it just because it's so much easier. I don't know. It's more intuitive for me. A subquery is handy for finding a minima or a maxima. I want to find the people I want to find all of the invoices, everything about the invoice. I want to find the invoice ID, and let's say, I could even find the vendor ID who had it, but let's stick with one table. It's easier. I want to find the invoice IDs, plural, for the maximum invoice totals, plural. Maybe one, maybe more. I could have 10 of them that are the maximum. I could have one that's the maximum. At least one of them will be the maximum. And there is one fly in that ointment. What if the whole range were null? That's another programming problem that'll come up next semester, but we won't have it this semester. Finding the minimum or the maximum where I may have ties. How would I do that with a join? I'm going to leave that for you as a problem. I thought I was thinking about doing it and saying, there is a way to do it with a join. How would you do that? Well, I guess I could select all the invoice totals and sort descending or ascending, and then tell you, hey, go look at them. They're right there at the top. Right? I mean, if I were giving them to a human being, I just do that. Okay, so let's see, invoice total. So here's one. This idea would give me the information. So if I were to run this I get it. And notice that they're sorted now. There is the maximum. So the maximum is vendor ID 110. The invoice total is vendor name, vendor ID. Where did I get that iTote business? Execute. I don't know what I did there. Okay. Okay. Vendor name, vendor ID. No. Okay, max of invoice total as invoice, let's call this max, as IMAX, invoices, order by IMAX. So, it's like vendor ID. Okay, so anyway, this is going to give me all of the maximum vendor IDs. Since I did not select the vendor name, I had to group by the vendor ID. So this gives me the maximum invoice total per vendor ID. Okay, now it makes sense. But I have to tell you to go look at the output, and I have to tell you to parse the output. So which one has the greatest? Which one is the highest? Well, any fool can see that it's vendor ID 104 with a, is that right? Didn't sound, yeah, that didn't sound right. Any fool can see that it's vendor ID 110, yes, and with a maximum of $37,966.19. Right? Well, what if I had ties for that? Well, you could see them easily right there. And if I'm talking to human beings, that's fine. But I just want to see only that. Now I have a problem. What do? Do I say top 1? Well, how do I know I've got 1? Do I say top 10? I don't know that I've got 10. I don't know how many I've got. Now there is a way to do it. It involves a table join with itself, and I might leave that. That might be something that you find on the final. I will give you the. I will show you how to do it with a table join. It can be done. I throw that out as a challenge. I leave that as a challenge for you over spring break. Show me how to find the maximum without doing a subselect. Everything here comes from one table. Which table? Invoices. Everything that I'm output comes from one table. Now, if that's not true, it doesn't mean I can't do a subselect. It just means I like it a lot better when that's the case. Okay. And let's look at what that subselect would be. Okay. Well, I'll just copy this one. Vendor ID max invoice total as IMAX from invoices. I don't have to say, just say invoice total. Everything from one table from invoices where Now, I like to, when I open my parentheses, I like to open my parentheses on the same line as the rest of the statement. Inside the parentheses that I open, I tab over 1 for everything in there. Now, to me, this makes more sense, or well, it makes more sense than doing a join with itself. I'm going to have a join. Anytime you have a subselect, that is the same thing as a table join. Most of the time when you have a subselect, it can be changed into a join. Most of the time when you have a table join, you can change it into a subselect. Now, just about everything that I've given you so far has just as easily been written as a subselect than a join. And we'll write this one at some point as a join. This guy is only going to give me one, well, it'll give me one value back, invoice total. And if I had 2 invoice totals that matched that, that were the max, it would show me all 2, because I'm saying select the vendor ID and the invoice total from invoices, even if the vendor ID had 2 of them that tied for the max. With one vendor ID, it would give me the vendor ID twice. So if vendor ID 110 had 2 invoices that tied for that, where invoice total is in select max. Works the same way for minimum, works the same way, well, minimum and maximum in this case. Anytime we're looking for that. So if I had 10 ties, I would get 10 records returned. Okay, nice and clean. This is the way that you want to do it, because most of the time when you run a query, you are not giving it to a person to look at. You're not going to give the output of an SQL query to a human being most of the time. Most of the time it goes to another program for processing. Okay. Most of the time it's going out to a web page. And so I don't want to pass you any more than you should have. Questions? Okay. This particular one is just meat for a subselect. Maximum and minima. Maxima and minima. Plural.
Is there a way to do a top 10? Like
yes, you can do top 10. I pointed out in top 10, you can do top 10, meaning top 10 count. You can do top 10%, you know, top 25%. And I pointed out that I did not like that top 10. For some reason, one, it always returns, well, 10 if you have 10. And the second is that it depends on the order of the records. And in database, you should avoid things that have to do with the order of the records. So essentially you're saying, give me the top 1 and the top 2nd one and the top 3rd one down from the top of the table. And that implies that you're doing something besides retrieving the records by their content. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so we're violating a basic premise of database that says you retrieve data only by content. Now, do people violate it? Yes, every day. Right? I mean, we all drive the speed limit, right? Don't laugh at me. Okay. This one is, I could have said top 1 and I would have gotten it. But we want to retrieve it by content. Okay. It is now time for Dr. Smith's soapbox. My soapbox. I love soapboxes. This. Select vendor ID, invoice total from invoices, where invoice total, what? Equals, or is equal to, if you like. Select max. Well, how is that going to change things? The answer is, it doesn't. Doesn't change it at all. Well, why am I about to get on a soapbox and start jumping up and down here? Okay. What is the return type of an SQL query? Here is an SQL query right there. That's SQL query. Perfectly good. Select from where, or whether it doesn't have a where, but it doesn't have to. Select from query. What is that? What kind of a thing is it? I've said this several times. What is it?
Query.
It's a query, yes. What's highlighted there is a query. You don't know what's outside of that highlighting. That's a query. What is the result of a query? I'm sitting here making a square. A table. A query returns a table. Now this particular query, select max, returns a table with one row, one column. That's fine. One row and one column. Okay. What is this then? So that's on the right side of that equals sign, equality, is a table. What's on the left side of the equality? A number. So I've got a number is equal to a table. It's money, I know. Yes, I know it's currency, but currency is a number. We're going to have a whole chapter on data types. They're a big deal in database. So what have I got? I've got a number is equal to a table. Can a number and a table be equal? What? I'm sorry. The record? Yeah. I agree, but that's not. I'm not saying I'm. But what's on the right side of this equality up here? What is on the right side of this equality is not a number. It's not the same thing as what's on the left side. And I'm saying that equality means is the same thing as. So I'm asking, is a number the same thing as a table? No. It's a little bit like if one person is driving a car, one person, one is in her car, driving her car, and I say, then, okay, here's this person. Is this person equal to the same person as this car? Well, no, it's the person that's over here can be equal or the same person as the person that's driving the car. I don't know how they'd be the same if they're in two different places, but whatever. So I'm a little frustrated. You know why? Well, I don't know, because this is the way they do it, and they don't listen to me when I argue with them, and I say, no, they're not the same, and they don't listen to me. They just say, I'll get over it, Smith. So that's what I have to do. But my students have to do what I don't do, right? So we won't use equal, even though the database itself will accept it when you have exactly one item down there, one thing, max, right? If I were to select something else, then if it were to have more than one value in there, the equal would not work. I can't think of a way to do it quickly. I want something that's going to give me back a range, so I could say select invoice. I could change it a little bit. Let's see, what is it? Top. Now, if I got more than one value in that return table, in that subquery table, it would not work. Equal means only works. Okay? So we do not use equal. We use in. In is valid because that number is in this set of numbers. That makes sense. That is something you can say. We do not say equal, we say in. We do not say not equal to, we say not in. In is a thing, when I'm asking, is it equal to something that's in that set? In. Okay. Okay, well, I'm still on my soapbox here. Okay, find all of the vendor names and the invoice ID. Oh, vendor name, invoice ID. Vendor name, where's the vendor name? Vendors. Where's the invoice ID? Invoices. Oh, crap. Oh, well, it doesn't mean I can't use a subselect. Doesn't mean I can't use it. I can still use it. I'm just going to have a table join in there because I have to get it from two tables. Actually, this is going to be a three-way table join because my subselect is also going to be a table join. And this is just the way it is. It's just, that's life. Let me close this down and I'll go back on my soapbox in a minute. Okay, am I still up over there? Okay, vendor name, invoice ID, invoice total from vendors, enter join invoices on, and there he is. And I guess I could probably do it as a subselect, but you know, some things just work better as table joins. And like I say, I can do almost any table join as a subselect, but I don't always try to. Some things lend themselves to subselects. Some things lend themselves to table joins. This particular one, I just want the vendor names paired with the invoice IDs. That's pretty much a join, although it could be done as a subselect. It would get messier. Now, where invoice total is greater than, select average invoice total from invoices. So what this is saying is I want to see find all the vendor names, invoice ID with invoice total greater than the average. Notice I have 21 rows. Well, what if I were to change it around a little bit and ask for it to be less than the average? And I'll run that one just for funsies. And notice I got 92 rows. What does this tell you about the data that are in this table? What's that?
That you can do the total, that amount plus the whatever it is.
Then would add them up, yeah. What does it tell you about where the average is in the table, though? I got 92 below average and 21 above average. So I got a bunch of them. I got a bunch of big ones that are what we call skewing the data. Skewing the data. It's not a vulgar word. Yeah, and we see that. So the average is not in the middle. Okay, that's fine. And there are all of them that are above and below. And I did not put a order by on this. If I'd put an order by on it, the order by would have gone after the subselect. Now I'm going to jump up and down. Back on my soapbox. Oh boy, another soapbox. Tell me about greater than. Well, greater than, less than, equal to are all the same sort of thing. They are all what we call a relational operators. They all compare things. Greater than, less than, equal to, also not equal to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. There's 6 of them. And they compare things. And those things have to be the same. And I have the same problem here, exactly the same problem here that I had a minute ago. Because over here on this side of the inequality, I have a number is less than a table. But if I said n, it don't work the same, because that's not the same thing as less than. N is the way I do equality. So when I say n with a set like that, I'm saying, is it in that set? It's not quite the same thing as equality. Is it equal to anything in that set? Okay. But this isn't going to work. Now, this one is used more often. You will see this used on one side you've got a number, the other side you have then you have a less than, and the other side's a table. And if that table only contains one item, one row, one column, then it works. It does what we call it converts one side or the other. I don't know which one it converts, but it either probably converts the table. So it goes into the table, I'm guessing, pulls out that one value and says, oh, that's what they really want. They really want you to go in there and pull out this one value, this one AVG, and compare it to this. And it does, it works okay. One other little question here, should I name this derived field? If you did, it wouldn't hurt anything. I'm not going to get quite that picky. I say I always, if this were up here, if I were returning this, I would want it named. So I would want you to say, you know, as something. But since we're not returning it, I don't really care. And if it's going to be output, I don't want to see that thing that says no column name. But down here, it's not being printed. Okay, how can I fix this? Here's my soapbox. I'll give you this file. Result is a table, okay. Invoice total is currency. I have greater than, less than a table. They're not the same kind of things, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here it is now with better form. Select vendor name, select the same stuff from the same stuff, in the inner join there, where invoice total is greater than or less than, if you like, all. Instead of in is the way we write equal to. When I'm working with sets like this, I will say greater than all. You can say greater than or equal to also. I don't write not equal to, I write not in. But greater than or less than all. What that says is, okay, stretch it out as a set, and where this number is greater than all of the numbers in that set. So now I'm talking about the things in the set, not the set as a whole. Okay, bueno. Okay. Less than works. There is another one besides all. All is by far and away the most frequently used. The other one that is used there is any, A-N-Y, any. The difference between all, this one says where the invoice total is greater than everything. It's greater than the greatest thing in this set. If I say any, I'm saying it's greater than the smallest thing in this set. There's something in that set that is greater than. So one of them says it has to be above the top, and the other one says it has to be above the bottom. I just don't use any as much. I don't think I've ever written it in a query that I can remember. I've never used any. Questions? Okay, gee whiz. I don't want to get into those. Subqueries. Let me go back to my, okay. Notice that these subqueries, the subqueries on all of my examples so far, the subqueries have been in the where statement. That's the place that if they're in that where statement, they are the most intuitive, in my opinion. Where some value is in or greater than any, greater than all, let's see, greater than any. Usually it's greater than all, less than all. I want you to use the all in it. The in, not in, but the subquery comes in the where statement. What if I wanted the invoice total also? This is just a rehash. The reason we get an error message here is because of the last chapter. We didn't have a group by. Let me go to the next one. I don't know how much longer I'm going to go. Okay, here I'm talking about in versus equal. I want to use in. In my opinion, it is poor form to use equal, a subset. And I go on and on and on and blather on about that for a whole page here. I think I've pretty much beaten that dead horse. Okay. Subqueries. I'm keeping the order that these are coming in the textbook. I'm thinking I will put this particular one off and do it after we come back, or I might record a lecture on this little piece. I'm afraid I'm going to see everybody's eyes rolling back in their head as you drop off to sleep in this hot room. I'm going to let you look at this. So I'm going to leave this for, Dr. King has a very good video here on this topic, correlated subqueries. I'm going to assign that. I'm not going to make the assignment. Of course, I know you all are going to do assignments over spring break, right? Yeah, get caught up. Okay, if you have any outstanding stuff, because as we come back from spring break, I'm going to start timing out some things. You know, for example, if you haven't turned in chapter 1 yet, or module 1, we got, I guess is module 3 is the first thing you turn in. If you haven't turned in module 3, we got a problem. So get anything that's in the past turned in. I'm probably going to time them out, because if you haven't turned in module 3, I probably won't see you around at the end of the semester, so there's no particular reason I need to worry about keeping it right in my face all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and end the discussion there. I'm not going to turn off this right now. We are going to do the correlated subqueries, and the correlated subquery is where the students typically have problems. Let me tell you a little bit about them before we go. A correlated subquery has a query involving a table. The subquery involves the same table. So the query, the outside query, gives the table a name. The inside query gives the table a name, and what a correlated subquery is essentially is a self-join. We talked about that very briefly, but I like the correlated subquery better than the self-join. And I'm going to make the assignment. I don't want to sit here and play a video. That doesn't make any sense. The video is there. It's linked. It's on YouTube. It is a good one. Okay. Dr. King talks really, really fast, but he gets a lot said. And the students gripe about him. English as second language students do gripe about him because he does talk very fast. But you can always stop and back up. Okay. So I'm going to end there, about 10 minutes early. And then we'll come back to that after. I will log in at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, just to see if there's any discussion or anybody have any questions. Okay. If you are not pretty much there on Friday morning, I'll probably start a recording on it so I can post it. If there ain't anybody there, I probably won't record it. So, and if nobody shows up for the session, meaning showing up means log in, then okay. I mean, I'll be there. I don't know where I'll be, but I'll be online virtually. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording now, but I'm going to leave the session active. Anybody online got any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, I'm going to